My name is Alyssa. I'm 26 years old. And the day my own mom changed the locks on me, I realized that blood doesn't always mean family. She texted me just like that, cold as ice. You don't have a home anymore. And you want to know the worst part? She sounded proud of it. Like she'd finally won some sick game I didn't even know we were playing. But 2 days later, her lawyer called mine. And that's when everything flipped. If you've ever been betrayed by your own family, and I mean really betrayed, not just some petty argument that gets resolved over Sunday dinner, you'll want to hear this one. Because this isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation or any of that healing journey nonsense people love to preach about. This is about what happens when the person who's supposed to protect you becomes the one you need protection from. Before we start, subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Because trust me, real life can get darker than any fiction you've ever read. Comment where you're watching from too. I want to know how far betrayal travels. Does it cross oceans? Does it hide in suburbs? Does it wear the face of someone who once held you when you cried? I remember that day like it's burned into my retinas. Every single detail. The way the afternoon sun hit the porch. The weight of my work bag on my shoulder. The sound my key made when it wouldn't turn in the lock. That metallic scraping sound. That resistance. That moment when your brain refuses to accept what's happening because it's too cruel, too deliberate, too impossibly wrong. I tried the key again. And again. My hands started shaking. Not from fear, not yet. From confusion. From that creeping horror that starts in your stomach and climbs up your throat like acid. And then I saw my suitcase. My suitcase. Just sitting there on the porch like garbage waiting to be collected. Clothes I'd carefully folded that morning were now crammed inside, zippers barely closed. My laptop bag tossed on top like an afterthought. I looked up at the window. My window, the one I'd stared out of since I was 7 years old. And there he was.
Rick.
My mother's new husband. Smirking. Actually smirking. Like this was the highlight of his pathetic little day. I walked up to that window and I knocked. Not aggressive. Just firm. The knock of someone who pays bills. The knock of someone who has every right to be there. He cracked the window just enough for me to hear him. Not enough to have a real conversation. Just enough to deliver his little scripted line. Your mother said you don't live here anymore, he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. You made your choice. My choice. My choice? I wanted to scream. What choice? The choice to work 2 jobs so we could keep this house? The choice to spend my 20s taking care of my dying grandmother while everyone else went to happy hours and vacations? The choice to sacrifice my own life so my mother could have hers? But I didn't scream. I just stood there, useless key still gripped in my trembling hand, staring at this man who'd been in our lives for barely 18 months, acting like he owned the place. The betrayal, God, the betrayal cut so deep I couldn't even feel it at first. It was like being stabbed with a frozen knife. You know it's happening. You know it should hurt. But you're too shocked to process the pain. I'd been paying half the mortgage for years.
Years.
While my mother stayed home, while she redecorated, while she took weekend trips with Rick. I'd been working myself to exhaustion, sending money every single month without fail, because that's what you do for family. That's what good daughters do. And while I was doing all that, while I was being the reliable one, the responsible one, the one everyone could count on, I was also taking care of Grandma. Changing her sheets. Making her meals. Sitting with her during those long, terrifying nights where her breathing got shallow, and we didn't know if she'd see morning. Mom was there too, sure. But I was the one who stayed. I was the one who gave updates and friendships and any chance at a normal young adult life because Grandma needed me.
Because family needed me.
The humiliation of standing on that porch with my belongings in a suitcase, like a college kid getting kicked out for breaking dorm rules, was suffocating. Neighbors could see. Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down slowed her walk. I could feel her eyes on me, questions forming in her mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed on my friend Jenna's couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every conversation, every warning sign I'd ignored because I wanted to believe my mother was better than this. I kept asking myself, how do you get erased from your own home? How does the person who taught you to tie your shoes decide you're disposable? I didn't know yet that the answer would cost my mom everything. The text came at 2 in the morning. Because of course it did. The cruelty always picks the worst possible time. My phone lit up in the darkness of Jenna's living room, and for just a second, just one stupid, hopeful second, I thought maybe it was an apology. Maybe she'd come to her senses. Maybe she'd realized what she'd done.
But no.
No, instead I got this. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now, haha.
Haha.
She wrote haha. Like this was a joke. Like destroying your daughter was something to laugh about. I read it 7 times before I could even move. Each time, it got worse. Each time, a new detail would stab deeper. The casual cruelty of we, including Rick in this decision like they were a united front against me. The finality of you don't have a home anymore, not here, but anymore, like I'd never have one again. And that haha at the end. That mocking little addition that made it clear this wasn't just about getting me out. This was about humiliating me. About winning. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone. But I managed somehow, through the rage and heartbreak and complete devastation, to take a screenshot. My fingers moved on autopilot while my brain was still trying to process that my mother, my own mother, had actually sent this. I saved that screenshot like evidence at a crime scene. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? Evidence. Proof that the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally had conditions after all. And I'd apparently failed to meet them.
I was too proud to cry.
Or maybe too shocked. Or maybe, and this is what scares me the most, maybe some part of me had been expecting this all along. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. Waiting for her to prove that all my sacrifices meant nothing. But my voice, when I tried to speak out loud, just to hear sound, to prove I was still real, still here, still existing despite being erased, my voice cracked. You ever realize, I whispered to the darkness, that the person who raised you is your first real enemy? Because that's what she'd become. Not my mother, not my family, my enemy. The person actively trying to hurt me. The person who knew exactly which buttons to push, which wounds to open, because she'd been there for every single one. She'd been there when I fell off my bike at 8 and scraped my knees raw. She'd been there when I got bullied in middle school and came home crying. She'd been there for my first heartbreak, my graduation, my first real job. She'd been there for all of it. And now she was using all that knowledge, all that history, all those vulnerabilities she'd witnessed, to destroy me as efficiently as possible. Be honest with me. What would you do if your mom sent you that text? Would you fight back? Would you walk away? Would you crumble? Would you rage? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know if what I did next makes me strong or just broken in a different way. That text message lived in my phone like a demon. I couldn't delete it. Couldn't stop reading it. At 3 a.m., at 5 a.m., at 6:30 when the sun started creeping through Jenna's curtains and I realized I hadn't slept at all. Let's see how brave you are now. She wanted to test me. She wanted to see me beg. She wanted me broken and desperate, crawling back to apologize for crimes I didn't commit. But what she didn't know, what Rick with his smirking face didn't know, what neither of them had bothered to check, was that I had something they'd forgotten about. I had Grandma's voice in my head. Grandma's lessons. Grandma's insurance policy. And I was about to become very, very brave. Jenna found me the next morning still on her couch, phone clutched in my hand, staring at nothing. Did you sleep? She asked, already knowing the answer.
No.
She sat down next to me, coffee in hand, and for a long moment we just existed in silence. That's real friendship, by the way. Not trying to fix everything immediately. Just being there while the world burns. Finally, she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know." But Jenna, God bless her, Jenna wasn't the type to accept defeat. "Alyssa," she said carefully, like she was handling explosives, "your name is on the property deed. Remember?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. Because for about 12 hours, I'd forgotten. I'd been so consumed by the emotional devastation that I'd completely forgotten the legal reality. Grandma had added me to the deed years ago, before she passed. Before the cancer got bad. Before she knew Rick would even exist. She'd pulled me aside one afternoon, her hands already shaking from the treatments, and said, "I want you protected. I want you to always have a home." At the time, I thought she was being paranoid, overly cautious. I never imagined I'd need that protection from my own mother. But she knew. Somehow, she knew. "I'm on the deed," I repeated slowly, the words starting to mean something. Starting to shift from abstract legal concept to actual weapon in my hands. "You're on the deed," Jenna confirmed. "Which means technically, legally, you own half that house." Half the house. I owned half the house they'd just locked me out of. They thought they could just push me out. Throw my stuff on the porch like trash and laugh about it in text messages. They thought I was powerless. Just another kicked puppy who'd eventually slink away and disappear. But I was legally one signature away from becoming their landlord. The rage that had been sitting cold and dormant in my chest suddenly caught fire. Not hot rage. I wasn't going to scream or break things or make emotional decisions. No, this was calculated rage. Surgical rage. The kind that plans and executes and doesn't stop until justice is served. I called a lawyer that afternoon. A real estate attorney named Patricia Chen who had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. Her consultation fee was $200 I didn't really have, but I paid it anyway. This was an investment. I walked into her office with my laptop bag full of evidence. Screenshots of the text messages. Videos I'd taken of my belongings locked inside. You could see my boxes through the window, my pictures still on the walls. Photos of receipts from my mortgage payments, bank statements showing years of regular transfers to my mother's account. Character witnesses ready to testify that I'd lived there. Mail with my name on it. Utility bills I'd paid. I documented everything. Every single piece of proof that I had been erased intentionally and illegally. Patricia spread it all out on her conference table and looked at me with something like respect. "They made a mistake," she said simply. "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that costs you everything." She explained it to me slowly, making sure I understood every step. Joint ownership. Partition rights. Illegal lockout statutes. The fact that my mother couldn't legally bar me from property I owned. The fact that changing the locks without my consent was, technically, theft of my access rights. One simple form, Patricia said, sliding a document across the table, can flip the power dynamic in your favor. I looked down at it. Joint ownership claim and partition request. Legal jargon that translated to, "I'm taking what's mine." My hand hovered over the signature line. This was the point of no return. If I signed this, I wasn't just fighting back. I was going to war. Against my own mother. Against the woman who'd been at every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone. But then I remembered the text. The haha. The satisfaction in Rick's voice when he said I didn't live there anymore. I signed. Most people don't know this, but that form, that one piece of paper, started a legal chain reaction they couldn't stop. Subscribe if you want me to show you exactly what I filed, because understanding your rights can change your life. It changed mine. Within 48 hours, Patricia had filed it with the court. Within a week, a legal notice was delivered to my mother's door. And that's when their lawyers started panicking. The email came 2 days after the legal filing. Subject line: "We have a problem. Call immediately." It wasn't sent to me. It was sent to Patricia. But she forwarded it with a note. "Thought you'd want to see this. They're scrambling." I opened it on my phone, sitting in my car outside the grocery store where I'd just picked up a shift to pay rent at Jenna's place. My hands were still smelling like bleach from cleaning the stockroom, and here I was reading about how my mother's carefully constructed plan was falling apart. The lawyer, some guy named Gordon Mitchell, who probably charged $300 an hour to send threatening letters, was basically begging Patricia to make me stop. He used fancy language, legal terminology that was supposed to sound intimidating, but the message was clear. Rick had fucked up. See, while I was sleeping on couches and trying to figure out how to rebuild my life, Rick had been busy. He'd contacted a real estate investor about selling part of the property. Not the whole thing, just enough to get some cash. A subdivision of the lot, maybe. Some scheme to profit off land that wasn't entirely his to sell. He'd even gotten as far as signing preliminary paperwork before someone, probably a title company clerk doing their basic due diligence, noticed there were 2 names on the deed.
Not 1, 2.
And that's when the legal freeze hit. The entire transaction ground to a halt. The investor's lawyer sent a nasty letter threatening to sue for fraud if the sale proceeded without all owners' consent. The title company refused to move forward. Rick's dreams of easy money evaporated overnight. And my mother, who'd thought she was so clever changing those locks, suddenly realized she'd locked herself into a nightmare. Patricia called me after I'd read the email 3 times. "They want to negotiate," she said. "Negotiate what?" "They want you to sign off on the sale. They're offering you a cut. 10%. I laughed. Actually laughed. A bitter, hollow sound that didn't feel like it came from me. 10% of what I already own half of. That's what I said. I told them we'd consider 25% as a starting point for discussion, just to see their reaction. And Gordon said he'd talk to his clients. Which means your mother is probably having a breakdown right now.
Good.
The word popped into my head before I could stop it. Good. Let her break down. Let her feel 1 fraction of what I felt standing on that porch with my suitcase. But Patricia wasn't done. "Alyssa, there's something else. Your mother's been trying to call you." I blocked her number. "She's been calling me then. Leaving voicemails. She sounds desperate."
Desperate.
The woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to be strong, who'd told me never to beg for anything, was now desperate. "She wants to talk to you directly," Patricia continued. "She says this is between family and lawyers shouldn't be involved." I closed my eyes, sat there in my car with the engine off, groceries getting warm in the trunk, and felt something crack inside my chest. "Family," I repeated quietly. "She wants to talk about family. After she texted me, haha, at 2 in the morning. After she had her husband smirk at me through the window. After she tried to erase me from my own home. Now she wants to talk about family. I can tell her you're not interested." "No," I said. "Tell her I'll respond when I'm ready. Which might be never. Tell her that for once in my life, the silence is mine." For once, the silence was mine. Not her disappointed silences when I didn't meet expectations. Not her cold shoulder treatments when I questioned her decisions. Not her martyred sighs when I asked for help. This silence, this refusal to engage, to comfort, to fix what she'd broken, this was my power. And I was going to hold on to it until she understood what it felt like to be shut out. My phone buzzed constantly over the next few days. Blocked number calling. Unknown number calling. Finally, I just turned off my voicemail. Jenna would find me staring at my phone sometimes, watching it light up with another attempt at contact, and she'd ask, "Are you okay?" And I'd say, "I will be." Because somewhere between the lockout and the lawsuit, I'd stopped waiting for my mother to love me the way I deserved. I'd stopped hoping she'd wake up and realize what she'd done. I'd stopped believing that family meant something to her beyond convenience and control. If you've ever had to choose peace over people you love, even when it breaks your heart, even when it goes against everything you were taught about forgiveness and family, hit that subscribe button. You deserve your voice back. You deserve your silence. You deserve to decide when and if someone gets access to you again. The lawyer's emails continued. Negotiations that went nowhere. Offers that insulted me. Threats that Patricia laughed off. And through it all, my mother's calls kept coming. Desperate little attempts to reach me, to manipulate me, to somehow convince me that I was the one being unreasonable. But I was done being reasonable. Reasonable daughters get their locks changed. Reasonable daughters get erased. I was going to be something else entirely. 3 months. That's how long it took for the legal system to confirm what I already knew, that house was as much mine as it was hers. 3 months of court dates and depositions and paperwork. 3 months of living in limbo, bouncing between Jenna's couch and a cheap sublet I could barely afford. 3 months of my mother's lawyer sending increasingly frantic letters while Patricia calmly destroyed every argument they made. The hearing itself was almost anticlimactic. Judge Morrison, A woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and absolutely no patience for bullshit reviewed the evidence in about 20 minutes. Property deed with both names. Check. Evidence of illegal lockout. Check. Proof of my financial contributions. Check. Text messages showing intent to permanently exclude me. Big check. This is clear-cut, Judge Morrison said, looking at Gordon Mitchell with something close to contempt. Your clients illegally locked out a legal co-owner and attempted to dispose of jointly owned property without consent. I'm granting the petition for partition. Partition. The word my mother would come to hate more than any other. It meant the property had to be divided. Either physically split, which was impossible given the house structure, or sold, with proceeds divided between owners. Or, option 3, one party could buy out the other at fair market value. Gordon tried to argue, claimed financial hardship, suggested a payment plan, said my mother couldn't afford to buy me out and couldn't afford to move. Patricia stood up, and I swear I fell in love with her in that moment. Your Honor, the respondent demonstrated no such concern for financial hardship when she locked the petitioner out with only a suitcase. Perhaps she should have considered the consequences before illegally excluding my client from property she legally owns. Judge Morrison smiled. Actually smiled. Petition granted. The property will be appraised within 30 days. At that time, Ms. Alyssa Chin will have the option to buy out her mother's share at fair market value, or force a sale with proceeds split 50-50. Ms. Helen Chin and Mr. Richard Patterson will have the same option to buy out the petitioner's share. If neither party can reach an agreement within 60 days, the property will be listed for public sale. The gavel came down. I sat there in the courtroom, watching my mother cry in the row behind her lawyer, and felt absolutely nothing. Not satisfaction. Not guilt. Not vindication. Just nothing. A vast, empty space where my feelings for her used to be. She tried to approach me in the hallway after. Rick held her back, whispering something urgent in her ear. Probably their lawyer's advice not to contact me directly. But she called out anyway, her voice cracking. Alyssa, please. We need to talk about this. I turned, looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since that day on the porch. She looked older, smaller somehow. Her hair was grayer. She'd lost weight. There were circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. And I felt nothing. Please, she said again. You can't do this to me. I held her gaze for a long, cold moment. I didn't do this to you, I said quietly. You did this to yourself. Then I walked away. Patricia caught up with me at the elevator. That was badass. I don't feel badass. I feel empty. That's because you're grieving. You're allowed to grieve, even when you're winning. But was I winning? It didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving. Like I'd been in a car crash and somehow walked away while everything I loved burned behind me. The property appraisal came back 2 weeks later. The house was worth $480,000. My half, $240,000. They had 60 days to either buy me out or agree to sell. They couldn't do it. Of course they couldn't. Rick's credit was garbage. Patricia had checked. Between his student loans and credit card debt and the fact that he'd apparently been fired from his last 2 jobs, no bank would touch him. And my mother had no income of her own beyond Rick's inconsistent paychecks. They'd backed themselves into a corner. The house they'd thought was entirely theirs, the house they'd locked me out of so confidently, was now my leverage. My mother called one last time. Patricia had warned me she might, but I answered anyway. Some sick part of me wanted to hear what she'd say. Alyssa. Her voice was raw. I'm begging you. Don't force us to sell. This is my home. Our home. Your childhood home. All your memories are here. Don't throw that away, because you're angry. I let her finish. Let her make her case. Let her cry and plead and try every manipulation tactic she'd perfected over 26 years of motherhood. Then I said, you threw it away when you changed those locks. You threw away every memory, every moment, every piece of history we shared. You threw me away. So now I'm taking what's legally mine and you can't stop me. Please. No. You don't get to please me. You texted me, haha. You left me on the porch like trash. You tried to erase me. And now you're facing the consequences of your choices. That's not my fault. That's yours. I hung up. The house went on the market 30 days later. Patricia found a real estate agent who specialized in quick sales. We priced it competitively, $475,000, just below appraisal to attract multiple offers. It sold in 11 days. Just like that, I took half the house they'd locked me out of. $237,500 deposited into my account after closing costs. More money than I'd ever seen in my life. Money that represented every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of humiliation I'd endured. Blood money. That's what it felt like. The price of my mother's love, apparently, was $237,500. Would you have done the same in my place? Comment below, justice or revenge. Because I still don't know which one I chose. Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe justice is just revenge that fills out the right paperwork. The movers came on a Tuesday. I shouldn't have gone.
Patricia advised against it.
Jenna thought it was a terrible idea. But I needed to see it. Needed closure, maybe. Or maybe I just needed to watch them leave. I parked across the street, 3 houses down. Far enough that they might not notice me. Close enough that I could see everything. The moving truck was one of those big U-Hauls. Rick was directing traffic, his face red, sweat staining his shirt despite the cool weather.
Stressed.
Defeated. Exactly how he'd made me feel that day on the porch. My mother emerged from the front door, the door I'd been locked out of, carrying a box. She moved slowly, like she'd aged 10 years in 3 months. Maybe she had. She looked around the neighborhood. That slow, sad look of someone saying goodbye to a life they'd thought was permanent. Her eyes swept past my car, and for a second, I thought she'd seen me. But she looked away, back to the house, and I realized she hadn't. She was looking through me, past me, at nothing. I watched them pack box after box. Furniture I'd helped pick out. My grandmother's antique dresser that I'd spent weekends refinishing. Pictures from the walls, including several of me that they'd apparently kept up this whole time, which felt like its own special kind of cruelty. Part of me wanted to get out of the car, to walk up and say something. I don't know what. Maybe I'm sorry it came to this. Maybe you should have loved me better. Maybe just goodbye. But I stayed in the car, because the truth was, I had nothing left to say to her. Every word I'd needed to speak, I'd spoken through lawyers. Every feeling I'd needed to express had come out in court documents and property claims. This was the language she taught me. Actions over words. Consequences over conversations. Taking what's yours before someone takes it from you. For years, I'd begged to belong in that house. Paid my share without complaint. Sacrificed my own life to maintain hers. Proved my loyalty over and over and over again.
And it was never enough.
But now they were the ones leaving. Now they were the ones with nowhere to go. Now they were the ones learning what it felt like to be erased. I watched until the last box was loaded. Watched Rick slam the truck door shut with unnecessary force. Watched my mother take one final look at the house, her shoulders shaking with sobs she couldn't control.
And I still felt nothing.
No, that's a lie. I felt something. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not happiness. But something close to peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you fought back. From knowing you didn't let them win. From knowing that sometimes the only way to heal is to burn down everything that hurt you and walk away from the ashes. The truck pulled away from the curb. Rick driving, my mother in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead like she couldn't bear to look back. I sat in my car as the sun started to set. Golden hour light casting everything in warm, forgiving tones that the situation didn't deserve. The house looked beautiful. The lawn perfectly maintained by the new owners who'd already moved in. Kids' bikes on the porch. A different family's life beginning where mine had ended. I thought about Grandma then. About how she'd added my name to that deed with shaking hands. How she'd looked at me with such love and said, "I want you protected." She'd known. Somehow, she'd known this day might come. Known that love isn't guaranteed. That family can fail. That sometimes the only thing standing between you and complete destruction is your own name on a piece of paper. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered to the empty car. "Thank you for protecting me when no one else would." I started the engine. Took one last look at the house that used to be my home and was now just a building. Just bricks and mortar and memories I'd learned to let go of. Family isn't about who locks you out. It's about who lets you in. It's about who shows up when you're on the porch with a suitcase. It's about who fights for you instead of against you. It's about who sees you as a person instead of an obstacle. My mother had failed every one of those tests, and now she was gone and I was free. If this story hit you hard, don't scroll away. Subscribe before the next twist catches you off guard. Comment karma if you believe what goes around comes around. Because I used to think karma was a myth people told themselves to feel better about injustice. But now I think maybe karma is just the long, slow process of consequences catching up to cruelty. And if you've ever rebuilt your life from betrayal, if you've ever had to choose yourself over people who should have chosen you first, this channel is for you. Because you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not unforgiving or cold or wrong for protecting yourself. You're just learning what I learned. Sometimes losing your home is how you find your power. I drove away that evening and didn't look back. Not once. Not when I passed the corner where I used to wait for the school bus. Not when I drove by the park where I'd learned to ride a bike. Not when I left that neighborhood for what I knew would be the last time. The money from the sale is sitting in my account. I haven't touched it yet. Patricia says I should invest it, buy my own place, start fresh. Jenna says I should take a trip, see the world, remember what it's like to be young and free. My therapist, yes, I'm seeing a therapist now because betrayal trauma is real and I'm done pretending I'm fine, says I should take my time deciding. That there's no rush. That healing doesn't have a deadline. I think they're all right. But more than anything, I think Grandma was right. She protected me when I couldn't protect myself. She gave me options when I thought I had none. She loved me enough to plan for a future where I might be alone, might be hurt, might need saving. That's what real family does. Not the family you're born into, not the people who share your blood, but the people who show up, who fight for you, who leave you pieces of themselves that keep you safe long after they're gone. My mother taught me what love isn't. Grandma taught me what it is. And I'm finally learning the difference. Sometimes the locks change. Sometimes the people who should protect you become the people you need protection from. Sometimes family betrays you in ways that feel unforgivable because they are unforgivable. But sometimes, just sometimes, you have a grandmother who knows, who plans, who loves you enough to make sure you'll survive even the worst betrayal. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes losing your home is exactly how you find your power. My name is Alyssa. I'm 26 years old. And I learned that blood doesn't always mean family. But sometimes family means survival. And sometimes survival means walking away with your head high and your pockets full and your conscience clear. That's the lesson my mother taught me, even if she didn't mean to. And I'm never forgetting it.